Do you hear it? The echoes of the past, the whispers of forgotten truths, fragments of memories lost in the shadows. Welcome to BRAINROT, Echoes, where we bring you stories long buried, unravel mysteries cloaked by time, and guide you through the darkest corners of the mind and the universe. Each video is more than just content. It's an echo resonating deep within, urging you to question, to wonder, to explore. Backend index pointing right, hit subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and join us in listening to the echoes the world tried to silence. The Doctor, the War, and Three Hearts. You know what your problem is, General? Dr. David Kellner said, his hands elbow deep in the alien's chest cavity. Apparently, Tuesday was the kind of day where you get to perform emergency surgery on a 7-foot-tall insectoid war criminal. You've got 3 hearts, but not one of them is in the right place. The Kithen general wheezed what might have been a laugh, or possibly the sound of his respiratory system failing. Hard to tell with these bug people. Human humor. Even while I die? Oh, you're not dying on my watch, buddy. David adjusted his surgical light with a shoulder, since both hands were currently preventing an interstellar incident by way of cardiovascular collapse. I've got a reputation to maintain. Human doctor lets alien general croak is not the headline I want associated with my medical license. The irony wasn't lost on him. 3 weeks ago, this same general had been bombing human colonies. Now here David was literally holding the bastards' hearts together because apparently the universe had a twisted sense of humor. Except, David continued, because talking helped him focus, and the alternative was thinking about how absolutely insane the situation was. If you die, who's going to explain to the Galactic Council why a human medic was performing surgery in a Kithen military bunker during what's technically still a ceasefire? You shouldn't be here, a general managed. Yeah, well, tell that to your aide who dragged me out of the refugee camp at gunpoint. David found the torn artery he'd been looking for. Bingo. Speaking of which, where's Lieutenant Scary Face? I told him to get me more plasma. As if summoned by complaint, the aide scuttled back into the makeshift surgery, chittering frantically in Kithen. David didn't speak the language, but universal panic was pretty easy to translate. Let me guess, David said without looking up from his work. The human fleet just dropped out of hyperspace. You're all about to be vapor, and somehow this is my fault. The aide's chittering intensified. Thought so. David finished sealing the artery and moved to the next damaged organ. You know, General, most people send a fruit basket when they want to make friends. You guys apparently prefer to kidnap their medics during active combat. General Vexhigh's compound eyes focused on him with what David had learned to recognize as curiosity. You are not afraid? Oh, I'm disenchanted, David said cheerfully. But I'm also the only thing standing between you and meeting whatever gods giant space bugs pray to, so I'm channeling my terror into productive surgical precision. The truth was more complicated, but David had learned that complexity didn't play well when you're trying to keep someone alive under battlefield conditions. 3 weeks ago, the Kythons had hit Kepler Station. David had been pulling 12-hour shifts in the emergency ward, treating refugees from the outer colonies. Then the bugs had hit the station itself. He'd been in surgery when the walls started exploding, literally mid-operation, trying to save a kid who'd been caught in the first wave of attacks. The Kithen soldiers had burst through the hospital wing, weapons ready, expecting resistance. Instead, they'd found one exhausted human doctor, covered in blood, some of it his own, standing over an operating table, absolutely determined not to move. You want to shoot me? David had said that day, scalpel still in hand. Fine, but this kid doesn't die because you can't tell the difference between a combat zone and a medical facility. Apparently, that had made an impression. The human fleet, General Vexhigh now said. They will demand my surrender. Probably, David was working on the second heart now. Kithen anatomy was weird, redundant organs, but all connected in a way that made no evolutionary sense. Question is, are you going to give it to them? I am a general of the Kithen Empire. I do not surrender. Right. Honor, duty, probably something about the glory of your hive mind ancestors. David paused his work to look directly at the general. How's that working out for you so far? The bunker shook. Either the human fleet was getting closer, or something had just exploded. Possibly both. Your people, Vexai said slowly, are relentless. Yeah, we get that a lot. David went back to surgery. It's almost like we don't appreciate having our colonies bombed. We're human quirk, I guess. The aide chittered something urgent. He says the bunker's shielding won't hold much longer, Vexai translated. Of course it won't. David was nearly done with the second heart. One more to go. You know what would be really helpful right now? If someone had thought to maybe, I don't know, not start a war with a species known for being absolutely batshit crazy when you threaten their civilians. Your reputation comes first. You did it now. David moved to the third heart, the most damaged of the three. This one was going to be tricky. What exactly do your people say that humans are? Unpredictable. Violent when cornered. That you fight without honor. David snorted. Without honor, right? Because bombing refugee stations is super honorable. It was a military necessity. Military necessity. David's hands stilled for a moment. Tell me, General, how many military targets were on Kepler Station? How many weapons emplacements? Strategic resources? Silence. 0. David continued. It was a medical and refugee facility. The only military necessity was terrorizing civilians. He resumed his work, but his voice had an edge now. So forgive me if I'm not impressed by lectures about honor from someone whose idea of warfare involves targeting hospitals. The bunker shook again, harder this time. What? Vexai asked suddenly. Why what? Why save me? Your people, they would understand if you let me die. David considered this. It was a fair question. 3 weeks ago, if someone had told him he'd be performing life-saving surgery on a Kithan, he'd have recommended they get their general head examined. You really want to know? Yes. Because I'm a doctor, David sealed another vessel. Because my job isn't to decide who lives and who dies based on their politics, or their species, or how many people they've killed. My job is to fix what's broken, even if what is broken is your enemy. Especially then. David added, besides, you dying here doesn't bring back the people on Kepler Station. It just means more people are dead. The aide chittered again, more urgently. The human fleet is demanding to speak with whoever's in command, Vexai translated. They want immediate surrender of all Kithan forces in this system. Sounds reasonable, David said. You'd just finish bombing the crap out of their territory. If I surrender, you'll probably spend the rest of your life in human prison, but you'll have a life to spend. David was working on the final repair now. If you don't surrender, you'll definitely be dead in about 10 minutes when my people realize the deal isn't working and decide to solve this problem with overwhelming firepower. Is that a threat? It's a medical opinion, David grinned without looking up. I've seen what human weapons do to biological targets. Trust me, you don't want to be on the receiving end. The third heart was more damaged than he'd initially thought. The projectile, some kind of human plasma rifle shot, if he was reading the wound pattern correctly, had torn through the organ and damaged the surrounding tissue. This was going to take finesse. Your people, they sent you here knowing it was a trap. My people didn't send me anywhere. Your lieutenant dragged me here at gunpoint, remember? David used a micro-switcher to repair a tiny tear in the heart wall. But if you're asking whether the human fleet knew where I was when they showed up to turn your army into space dust, yeah, probably. And they came anyway. Of course they came anyway. That's what we do. David finished the repair and started closing. Someone threatens our people. We show up with way too much firepower and absolutely no chill. It's kind of our thing. Even for one human, especially for one human, David began the delicate process of sealing the chest cavity. See, that's what you never understood about us. We're not like you bugs with your hive mind and your collective consciousness. Every single human is irreplaceable. Every single human matters. The bunker's communications system crackled to life. A human voice speaking standard galactic. This is Admiral Rebecca Walsh of the Terran Federation Fleet. You have exactly 5 minutes to surrender all forces and release the human civilian you're holding, or we will demonstrate why picking a fight with Terra was the worst decision your species has ever made. David whistled appreciatively. Admiral Walsh. She's got a reputation, you know. Something about turning an entire Zor Blackaxian fleet into scrap metal when they tried to blockade the Vega colonies. You know her only by reputation, but she's definitely not the negotiation first type. David finished closing and began cleaning up. Congratulations, General. You're going to live. The question is whether you're going to live in a human prison or as a very brief, very bright flash of light. Vexai tried to sit up, then thought better of it. The surgery, it is finished, all done. You'll be sore for a few days, and you'll need to take it easy for at least a week, but all 3 hearts are functioning normally. David started packing his instruments. I'd recommend avoiding getting shot for a while. It's bad for your health. The communication system crackled again. 4 minutes, 30 seconds. Tick-tock, David said helpfully. The aide was chittering frantically now, gesturing toward the bunker's exit. Other Kithan soldiers were scuttling around, clearly preparing for either surrender or a fight. If I surrender, Vexai said slowly, what happens to my soldiers? That's between you and Admiral Walsh. But knowing humans, the ones who weren't directly involved in bombing civilians will probably get prisoner of war treatment. The ones who were, David skimmed. War crime tribunals aren't fun, but they're better than being vaporized. And you? What happens to the human doctor who saved a Kithan general? David considered this. Honestly, I'll probably get a medal and a lecture about not getting kidnapped by enemy forces. Maybe a psychological evaluation to make sure I haven't developed Stockholm Syndrome. Stockholm Syndrome. It's when hostages start sympathizing with their captors, named after an old Earth incident. David finished packing. Though technically I think what I have is more like Hippocratic Syndrome. I can't help but try to heal people, even when they're actively trying to kill me. The bunker rebooted again. This time dust fell from the ceiling. 3 minutes, the communication system announced. Okay, General, decision time. David stood up, medical bag in hand. What's it going to be? Surrender and live to see your bug children again? Or die heroically in a bunker on a planet nobody's ever heard of? Vexai was quiet for a long moment. David could hear the chittering of his soldiers, the hum of failing equipment, the distant rumble of human ships maintaining orbit. You said every human matters. That's right. Even enemy humans? Humans, even who oppose your government. David frowned. Where are you going with this? There are human prisoners in the detention facility on Kithan Prime. Scientists mostly, captured during our raids on your research stations. David felt something cold settle in his stomach. How many? 47. 47 human scientists. Yes. And you're telling me this because Vexai struggled to sit up again, this time successfully, because if I surrender, if I provide information about their location, your people might be able to save them. David stared at him. He could have died with that secret, but he didn't. That doesn't make him a good person, Doctor. No, David agreed, but it makes him a person who's trying to do the right thing. Maybe for the first time in his life. The bunker fell silent, except for the hum of life support and the distant sound of human shuttles approaching. Well, David said after a moment, this is going to be an interesting after-action report. Vexai made that wheezing sound again. I do not understand human expression. It means my commanding officers are going to have a lot of questions about how I ended up performing surgery on an enemy general who then surrendered his entire fleet. Will you be in trouble? David considered this. Probably, but not the fun kind of trouble where they give you medals and parade you around. More like the paperwork kind of trouble where you spend 6 months explaining your decisions to bureaucrats. The sound of shuttles was getting closer. Doctor, Vexai said quietly. Yeah. Thank you. David looked at him for a long moment. Thank me by making sure those 47 prisoners get home safe. I will. And, General? Yes. Next time you want to make friends with humans, try the fruit basket approach. It's a lot less likely to get you shot. The bunker door burst open and human soldiers in full combat gear poured in, weapons raised. David raised his hands slowly, medical bag still in one hand. Dr. David Kellner, Terra Medical Corps, he announced clearly. The alien general is my patient and has surrendered. The lead soldier, a lieutenant by his insignia, looked around the bunker with obvious confusion. Sir, we were expecting heavy resistance. Yeah, well, sometimes diplomacy works. David gestured toward Vexhai. General Vexhai, meet Lieutenant. Sorry, what's your name, Lieutenant? Morrison, sir. Lieutenant Morrison. Lieutenant Morrison, General Vexhai. He's surrendering his entire fleet and has information about human prisoners. Morrison looked between David and the alien general with the expression of someone whose training had not covered this particular scenario. Sir, Admiral Walsh wants to speak with you immediately. I figured she would. David looked back at Vexhai. Remember what I said about taking it easy and try not to get shot again. I might not be around to patch you up next time. Vexhai slowly nodded. Doctor, what you said about every human matching. Yeah. Does that apply to former enemies as well? David paused at the bunker entrance. I guess we're about to find out. 6 months later, the Galactic Council chambers on Nexus Station were packed. Inhabitants from dozens of species filled the circular auditorium, their various chittering, humming, and vocalizations creating a constant background noise that David was still getting used to after 3 weeks of testimony. Dr. Kellner, the arbitrator said in her translated voice, you maintain that your decision to provide medical aid to General Vexhai was based purely on medical ethics? Yes, Your Honor. David adjusted his formal uniform. He still felt ridiculous in dress blues, but Admiral Walsh had insisted something about representing humanity with dignity. Your Honor, when someone is bleeding out in front of you, you don't stop to ask about their political affiliations. You stop the bleeding. A ripple of chittering from the Kithan delegation. Approval or disapproval, David couldn't tell. The prosecution argued, the arbitrator continued, that your actions constitute collaboration with enemy forces. David flicked over at the human prosecution team. He didn't recognize the lead prosecutor, some JAG officer from Terra Command. The guy had been going after David for 2 weeks now, arguing that treating enemy personnel during active combat was somehow treason. Your Honor, I was kidnapped by enemy forces and forced to provide medical aid under threat of execution. If that's collaboration, then I think we need to redefine the term. More chittering, this time from multiple delegations. The universal translator was having trouble keeping up. But you weren't being coerced when you convinced General Vexhai to surrender, the prosecutor interjected. No, I wasn't. I was trying to prevent unnecessary deaths on both sides, including the death of a war criminal. David felt his temper rising, including the death of someone who had information that saved 47 human lives. The arbitrator raised one of her appendages for silence. The court will note that the prisoner exchange facilitated by General Vexhai's surrender did result in the safe return of 47 human scientists previously presumed dead. Your Honor, the prosecutor continued, that doesn't change the fact that Dr. Kellner violated military protocol by... Objection. The voice came from a human defense table. Commander Sarah Liu, David's military lawyer, stood up. The prosecution is mischaracterizing Dr. Kellner's actions. He was operating under the Medical Corps' standing orders to provide aid to any injured personnel, regardless of species or political affiliation. Sustained. The arbitrator looked back to David. Dr. Kellner, in your professional opinion, what would have happened if you had refused to treat General Vexhai? He would have died within minutes. All 3 of his major circulatory organs had been damaged by projectile weapons. And if he had died, David thought about this. The Kithan forces would have fought to the death rather than surrender. The human fleet would have been forced to destroy the entire bunker complex. The information about the prisoners would have died with him. So your decision to provide medical aid directly resulted in saving human lives? Yes, Your Honor. The arbitrator made some notes in her datapad. The court calls General Vexhai to testify. There was a stir in the chamber as the Kithan general was escorted to the witness stand. He moved slowly, still recovering from his injuries, but his posture was straight and his compound eyes alert. General Vexhai, the arbitrator began, you have pleaded guilty to war crimes in connection with attacks on human civilian targets. Why are you testifying on behalf of Dr. Kellner? Vexhai's translator made his voice sound flat, emotionless. Because he saved my life when he had no obligation to do so. Because he treated me as a person, not as an enemy. Did Dr. Kellner know about the human prisoners when he treated you? No. I told him afterwards when I decided to surrender. Why did you decide to surrender? Vexai was quiet for a long moment. Because Dr. Kellner showed me that humans value individual life above political advantage. Because he made me realize that the war I was fighting was wrong. The human prosecutor stood up. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The defendant is a convicted war criminal who is serving a life sentence in human custody. The arbitrator interrupted. And whose testimony is relevant to the charges against Dr. Kellner. Continue, General. The doctor asked me a question, Vexai said slowly. He asked how many military targets were on the station we attacked. The answer was 0. It was a medical facility, a refugee center. I knew this when I ordered the attack. The chamber fell silent. But Dr. Kellner treated me anyway. He saved my life anyway, even though I was responsible for killing his people. Vexai's translator couldn't convey emotion, but David could see the general's mandibles trembling slightly. In my culture, we believe that saving a life creates a debt. Dr. Kellner is owed a debt by every human who came home because of my surrender. Objection, the prosecutor said weakly. Overruled. The arbitrator looked at the general. General Vexai, in your opinion, did Dr. Kellner act appropriately? Dr. Kellner acted with honor. More honor than I showed in 30 years of military service. The prosecutor sat down, looking defeated. Thank you, General. The arbitrator made more notes. Dr. Kellner, please return to the stand. David walked back to the witness chair, still processing what Vexai had said. The general caught his eye as they passed, nodding slightly. Dr. Kellner, the arbitrator said once he was seated, the charges against you include violations of military protocol, unauthorized communication with enemy forces, and conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. How do you plead? David had been dreading this moment for 6 months. Your Honor, I plead guilty to violating military protocol. I was supposed to wait for authorization before treating enemy personnel. I didn't. A murmur ran through the chamber. However, David continued, I don't plead guilty to the other charges. Communication with enemy forces was necessary to coordinate the surrender and prisoner exchange. And if saving lives is prejudicial to good order and discipline, then maybe we need to review what good order and discipline actually mean. The arbitrator looked at her notes. The court finds the defendant guilty of violating military protocol regarding treatment of enemy personnel. David's heart sank. However, the court finds also that this violation was not only justified by circumstances, but resulted in significant strategic advantage for human lives and the saving of 47 human lives. The arbitrator looked up. Dr. Kellner, you are hereby reprimanded for failure to follow proper protocol. You are also awarded the Galactic Medal of Merit for extraordinary service in the preservation of life. The chamber erupted. David sat in stunned silence as delegates from dozens of species rose to their feet, chittering and vocalizing what sounded like approval. Furthermore, the arbitrator continued once the noise died down. This case highlights the need for revised protocols regarding medical personnel in combat situations. The court recommends that all Galactic Council member species adopt the Human Medical Corps doctrine of universal medical aid, regardless of species or political affiliation. More eruption from the gallery. David looked over at the human delegation, where Admiral Walsh was smiling slightly. High praise from her. Court is adjourned. As the chamber began to empty, David remained in his seat, still processing what had just happened. A reprimand and a medal. Only in the military. David looked up to see Vexai approaching, flanked by his guards. General, how are you feeling? Well, the human doctors say all 3 hearts are functioning normally. Vexai paused. I wanted to thank you again. You don't need to keep thanking me. I was just doing my job. No, you are doing more than your job. Vexai gestured toward the chamber. This trial, this new policy, it will save lives. Many lives. David stood up. Yeah, well, maybe it'll prevent some future doctor from getting court-martialed for doing the right thing. The 47 prisoners. They're all home safe. All 47. The last one was released 3 weeks ago. David smiled. Their families send their regards, by the way. Vexai's mandibles moved in what David had learned was the Kithan equivalent of smile. I am glad. Can I ask you something, Doctor? Of course, General. Why tell me about the prisoners? You could have kept that information, maybe used it to negotiate a better deal for yourself. Vexai considered this. Because you showed me that there was a better way. Because 47 lives mattered more than my pride. He paused. And because I wanted to prove that even old bugs can learn new tricks. David laughed. Did you just make a joke? I have been studying human humor. I am told it is an acquired taste. Yeah, while you're getting there, David extended his hand. Good luck, General. Try to stay out of trouble. Vexai looked at the offered hand for a moment, then carefully grasped it with one of his upper appendages. Thank you, Dr. Kellner, for everything. As the guards led Vexai away, David was approached by a familiar figure. Well, Doctor, Admiral Walsh said, that was interesting. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry about the... Don't apologize. You did the right thing. Walsh looked toward the departing Kithan general. Though next time, maybe try to avoid getting kidnapped by enemy forces. I'll do my best, ma'am. See that you do. We can't have our best medics getting themselves court-martialed every time they save the galaxy. Walsh turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Doctor? Yes, ma'am. The President wants to meet you. Something about a new position heading up the interspecies medical exchange program. David blinked. The what now? Apparently the Galactic Council was impressed by your diplomatic skills. They want to establish a formal program for medical cooperation between species. David thought about this. A chance to help establish protocols that might prevent future wars, or at least make them less bloody. A chance to make sure other doctors wouldn't face the choice between following orders and saving lives. Will there be more court-martials, Walsh? Probably. Then I'm definitely interested. As David walked out of the Galactic Council chambers, he reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. 6 months ago, he'd been a simple trauma surgeon. Now, he was apparently some kind of interspecies diplomat. His communicator chimed. A message from the refugee camp on Kepler Station. They needed a surgeon for incoming injuries from the Epsilon system, some kind of mining accident. David smiled and changed course toward the shuttle bay. Diplomacy could wait. Right now, somewhere in the galaxy, people needed a doctor, and whether they were human, Kithan, or something else entirely, that was all that mattered. Epilogue. 1 year later, the interspecies medical exchange program headquarters on Nexus Station was chaos, but it was organized chaos. David dodged a floating medical drone while reviewing patient files on his tablet, narrowly avoiding collision with a Zephyrian surgeon whose translator was apparently on the fritz. Dr. Kellner, his assistant called out, a young human named Alex who'd volunteered for the program straight out of medical school. The Andromedan delegation is here for the trauma surgery seminar. Great. Put them in conference room 3 and make sure the environmental controls are set for their atmospheric requirements. David looked up from his tablet. And Alex, check that the translator protocols are updated. Last time we had Andromedans here, the medical terminology kept getting translated as cooking instructions. Yes, sir. David's communicator chimed. Another message, this one from Admiral Walsh. Doctor, situation on Riel 7. Species unknown, hostile to outside contact, but they're requesting medical aid. Sound familiar, Walsh? David grinned and typed back, on my way. Try not to start a war before I get there. No promises. Transport leaves in 2 hours. David looked around the medical center he'd helped build. Doctors from 30 different species worked side by side, sharing knowledge and techniques that had already saved thousands of lives. It wasn't perfect. There were still cultural misunderstandings, translation errors, and the occasional diplomatic incident when someone accidentally violated someone else's medical taboos. But it was working. His communicator chimed again. This message was from an unexpected source. Dr. Kellner, Kithan Medical Facilities report 15% decrease in combat casualties since implementing human triage protocols. Thank you, General Vexai. David smiled and put away his tablet. He learned a lot in the past year about diplomacy, interspecies relations, and the complex politics of galactic medicine. But the most important lesson was the simplest one. Sometimes, the best way to change the galaxy was to save one life at a time. Alex, he called out, grabbing his medical bag. Cancel my afternoon appointments. I've got a house call to make. Where to this time, sir? Riel 7. Apparently, they've got a situation that requires the human touch. The diplomat kind or the medical kind. David headed toward the shuttle bay, already mentally reviewing xenobiology protocols for the species. With any luck, he said over his shoulder, there won't be a difference. After all, in David's experience, the best diplomacy was the kind that kept everyone breathing long enough to work out their differences. And if that meant occasionally performing surgery in hostile territory while enemy fleets circled overhead, well, that was just another Tuesday in the life of humanity's most unconventional diplomat. The shuttle bay doors opened, revealing the vast expanse of space beyond. Somewhere out there, people needed help, and whether they were human, Kithin, or something else entirely, David Kellner would be there to provide it. Because in the end, that's what humans did. They showed up. They refused to back down. And they saved lives, even when those lives belonged to people who'd been trying to kill them just moments before. It was, as Admiral Walsh had once observed, either humanity's greatest strength or their most dangerous weakness. David preferred to think of it as both.